What would this much broader mission look like? And on which side are the humanities in this regard? All these questions could be reduced to just one. What does it mean to be an educated person? For many parents contemplating sending their children to college and students who enroll in these colleges, this is not an abstract question, but an existential reality. My own experience is one good example. When I enrolled into the University of Ife in Nigeria, my father wanted me to study what will assure my future and the family's economic security. His preferences were predictably medicine, engineering, or some other technical field. These preferences were shaped not just by his awareness of what some of the notable members of our town had studied, but also by the indigenous philosophical understanding of who an educated person is. Among the Yoruba people of Nigeria, one of the words used to render an educated person is omoluabi. That is, a person capable of supporting himself and benefiting others through what he does. Education is to provide tools by which a person acquires the skills that enable him or her to make meaningful contributions to the society and the lives of his or her immediate family. These utilitarian interests also shape the ideological underpinning of many post-colonial African universities. At the 1963 UNESCO Conference on the Development of Higher Education in Africa, the expectation was that universities would produce the skilled human resources necessary to manage newly independent countries, to generate developmentally relevant research, and to provide community service. The same objective was retained when this issue was revisited 20 years later. Universities were reminded of their role in the production of knowledge, not just for its own sake, but for the sake of ameliorating the conditions of the common man and woman in Africa. Thus, my father's disappointment when I told him that I had decided to major in religious studies is not unlike the anecdotal experiences relayed by some of our students here at Wake when they cite their parents' preference as a reason for considering a particular major. For my father and many of these parents, education should make a person useful to himself and the society, with usefulness understood solely as acquisition of practical skills. The humanities are perceived as imprudent routes to achieving this goal, and therefore not something good for them, or not as good as the others. But is this instrumentalist conception of the objective of higher education necessarily broader than the idea of value-free education proposed by Professor Fish? I don't think so.
Value-free is a phrase I'd never use.
Okay. At least as I understood your argument. We'll return to that in a moment. This is not to deny an obvious fact, namely that education does indeed confer measurable advantages. This is why every human society seeks to educate its children, its new and future members. Education expresses what it is perhaps our deepest wish, to continue, to go on, to persist in the face of time. It's a program for social survival. But this program cannot be value-free. A long time ago, Aristotle suggested that the purpose of education is to reproduce in each generation the type of character that will sustain the Constitution. John Adams, this country's second president, echoes this mediating character of education when he observed that a constitutional republic needs, in addition to its religious institutions, a strong educational system to tame the corrosive effect of self-interest in human affairs. On this account, education is not merely relative. It has a normative function. Aristotle invokes the metaphor of ritual to explain the normative structure of education. What is important about it is not the outcome, the results it produces, but the process, that is, what the educational process is, and what students experience during this ritual-like process. The schools filled an intermediate space between family and society, And they also fill an intermediate time between infancy and adulthood. At the college and university level, this is no doubt a space and time for training and preparation for rehearsals, initiation ceremonies, and so on. During this educational process, the adult world is represented, and its knowledge, traditions, and rituals are interpreted by a corps of teachers like you and I who confront their students in a more or less enclosed community, what John Dewey called a special social environment. The students are granted a partial moratorium from the demands of society and economy. The faculty members, too, are protected from the immediate forms of external pressure. They teach the truths they understand, and the same truths to all the students in front of them, and respond to questions as best they can without regard to the students' social origins. My argument is that this is a much richer account of the goal of education in general and of the mission of higher education in particular than the two positions that I had previously stated. And this richer account is made possible by the contributions that the humanities have historically made to the educational process. The ideal of the ivory tower, which is focused on the professoriate, where pure research, discipline-specific knowledge will be pursued for its own sake, independent of social and political implications, represents only a partial truth of what we are and should be about. The other half is to be supplied by a wide range of curricular experiences that the students need to cultivate their whole human being. Both forms of education and intelligence, technical and aesthetic, are prerequisites for the functions of citizenship and life in general. My answer then to our original question about whether the humanities contribute to the good of humanity is in the affirmative, because they make possible the cultivation of the civic self and links the enterprise of inquiry and discovery to public happiness. I will conclude by emphasizing three distinct ways in which the humanities have historically played this role and which I believe are worth harmonizing with how we educate in the 21st century. This objective can be accomplished in any number of ways, but I will identify just three. First, the humanities help to foster the capacity for critical examination, which since yesterday we've repeated several times. I had mentioned earlier that the Yoruba people of Nigeria describe an educated person as omoluabi. But sometimes an educated person is also referred to as an olaju, that is, someone whose eyes are wide open. To be an olaju, therefore, is to be liberated from the chains or bondage of habit and custom, to be a person who can function with sensitivity and alertness as citizens of the world. This means one is leading a life that accepts no belief as authoritative simply because it has been handed down by tradition or become familiar through habit. A life that questions all beliefs and accepts only those that survives reason's demand for consistency and for justification. To the degree that the university ignores questions of values, it threatens the professional world with moral impoverishment and diminishes the university life by stunning its intellectual life. The university is precisely the site where critical inquiry should pose alternative goals for society at large. We concede too little to the range of human mind and grant too little to the capacity for the university to organize itself for civic and fruitful discourse if we assume that the only alternative to positivistic inquiry is subjective advocacy. Second, the humanities foster an expanded conception of selfhood. Through the exposure that students have to a wide range of course offerings, which Michele has just also emphasized, especially those that focus on non-Western cultures, on minorities within the Western culture, and on differences on gender and sexuality. Students are able to see themselves not simply as citizens of some local region or group, but also and above all as human beings bound to all other human beings by ties of recognition and concern. This objective supports rather than undermines the concern of scientific and technical education. The world around us is inescapably international. Issues from business and agriculture, from human rights to the relief of famine, require for their intelligent and cooperative solution a dialogue that brings people from many different national and cultural backgrounds. A graduate of Wake Forest University or any other US university ought to be the sort of citizen who can become an intelligent participant in these kinds of conversations. Finally, as bearers and interpreters of the received traditions, the humanities inform and enrich the ethos in which men and women grow and by which their minds are nourished. They foster, in other words, what can be called the narrative imagination. This means the ability to think what it might be like to be in the shoes of the person different from oneself, to be an intelligent reader of that person's story, and to understand the emotions and wishes and desires that someone so placed might have. And one concrete way by which Wake Forest has sought to cultivate and nurture this kind of narrative imagination is through civic and public engagement. These avenues, I believe, open up our students' horizons and enable them to link learning to responsible citizenship. Thank you.
You're not going to pull through with a prepared paper at this point. I think I'll probably just make some remarks about the talk if I can, and maybe if I can get into that paper, I'll do that. First of all, then looking at number 1, back on the sheet, if you look at number 1 and 5. If you were teaching at the University of Singapore, I think you could do 1 but not 5. I think if we were in Nazi Germany in 1935, you could do 1, but not 5. You'd get killed if you did 5. Somebody would come after you with a baseball bat or something equivalent from the party and break all your bones if you did 5. That was not possible. So that, for me, in a way, is a bit of a moral compass about some of this. Think about Saudi Arabia. Could you do 5 there? The freedom or obligation to oppose tyranny, oppression, and exclusion. Could you even talk about those things? What would happen to you in that situation? So that for me is something that's a bit worrisome. I taught in the British system for a number of years. I discovered that you don't have academic freedom, well, you don't have freedom of speech in the British system. That's a very peculiar thing. You say something, a student complains, you're talking to your chair, whoopsie, you got a problem. You can't speak your mind in that world, in a sense. But now that is not a technical thing. This is not to do with legal courts or anything. It's just you're restricted. So that's something I'm thinking about. Academic freedom is the freedom to do the academic job. Isn't that word really the imperative to do the academic job? Isn't freedom the opposite of what it really is in that line? It's the imperative to do the academic job, and not the freedom to do other jobs. The academic job is to introduce students to bodies of materials with which they were previously unfamiliar. Well, that could be an awful lot of things, of course. And sorry. And B, to equip students with their discipline-appropriate analytical skills. I have a big problem with the word equip, the skills approach. And this is one thing I noticed in the difference between American education and European education. There seems to be an ideology in America that comes from the lower schools that you're supposed to teach people ideas or thoughts or texts, but you're not supposed to affect them. Johnny's not supposed to come home from high school and say to the evangelical parents, I really like what Mr. Jones said today. I think I'm going to be an atheist. That could be a big problem in that lower school system. That you're not really supposed to get